Okay, yeah, so welcome from me, welcome those of you who are watching online now or later, whatever that means. So, yeah, we're following this series, drawing on this book, the Buddhist, the Noble Eightfold Path, by Sangharakshita, which is it's illuminating for us what the Eightfold Path is, and drawing our attention to how it's a very relevant teaching, and these 8 areas of our lives, how we need to look at them if we want to make progress, and what that means. So we're on, I think, so we've had perfect vision, we've had perfect emotion, speech, and now we're looking at perfect action today. So I'm not going to recap too much. So if you haven't been on to the other weeks, I think you'll pick up where we're going with this, and you can always watch them online as well, to get a kind of a bigger overview of the Eightfold Path. So I'm going to, we're talking about action, which is like so much, isn't it? I don't know what of our behaviour isn't action in a way. So I'm going to be talking about this huge kind of field it's a field or a minefield as well. So our actions can be very good, and they can get us into trouble. I'm going to refer to another classic Buddhist text, which is the film Groundhog Day. So I don't know how many times that's been referred to in Buddhist talks over the years, but it deserves revisiting. There's a pun in there as well. So I'm going to just remind us, rather than recap the Noble Eightfold Path, I'm going to recap Groundhog Day. So we've got this weatherman who's very arrogant called Phil, and he's been taken to, he's on a job in Nowheresville, and he's not very pleased about it, and it's I can't really remember, it's got something to do with a groundhog predicting the weather for the rest of the year, or some kind of bucolic event, and so he has to go to this town, and I don't think it's a long time since I watched it, but I don't think he's very pleasant, and he's very he thinks it's quite beneath him to go to this town. So, and he's trying to seduce someone, and he's just trying to get what he can out of the situation. And he wakes up the next morning, and it's the same day as started again. So he gets caught in this time loop. Every day is Groundhog Day. No one else is in this time loop. So every morning he wakes up to Sonny and Cher on the radio, and his day starts again. And remembering it has made me want to watch it again. I haven't watched it for a long time. So what happens is, obviously he's confused. He has to work out what's happening, etc. And it keeps happening. And one phase of this experience is that he realises there's no consequence. He feels there's no consequences to his actions. So he goes on this really debauched phase, and like getting drunk, and I don't know, speeding, and all sorts of things. And so it's like he can get away with anything, because the day will just start again in exactly the same way as it has every other previous day. And he, obviously it's film, so there's a love interest, and that's not going well. So he's trying to seduce this woman, and he can't seem to impress her. So he doesn't get what he wants, and I think he commits suicide as well, quite a few times. But he always wakes up in the mornings, and there's an implication that this is going on for more than you see in the film. Like it could be going on for a really, really long time. His stuckness in this particular loop. So I don't know if that's a sort of helpful reflection, like knowing what it's like to be stuck in a loop where things just feel like the same and they're going round and round. I think this film's just a really helpful allegory. so that happens. He has his debauched phase, and he just really, really despairs. And then he starts changing, and he realizes like he can predict certain things. So he can predict things that are going to go wrong in the town, and he can stop that from happening. He can save people's lives, etc. So he starts realizing that even though the day repeats daily, he starts realizing that he can have an effect. And he sort of starts changing. He starts working on himself and trying to act well, refining. He's got this project of this one day, and he starts refining how good he can make that day. And the good thing is that everyone else is starting the same day in the same way, but he remembers the other days, so he can learn things and he doesn't forget them. So he learns French, he learns the piano, he learns ice carving, as you would. And he becomes like this really proficient person, and he loses his arrogant attitude. I mean, as you would when, something as kind of catastrophic as that happens to him. And then, of course, at the end, he becomes such a sincere person that the woman who is a very good woman that he's trying to seduce, he actually forms a genuine connection with him, and all sorts of other good things happen. Like he becomes really, really good at piano. He makes an ice carving of the woman, anyway, it'd be interesting if someone did that, wouldn't it? He made an ice carving of you. Anyway, it worked for him. So there were these phases in the film, from self-centeredness. So his actions are self-centered. That's how he goes about in the world before Groundhog Day events start happening. I think he calls himself God because he's like, I'm the weatherman. I mean, I don't know how grandiose you can make being a weatherman, but he really tried. I'm the weatherman. I make the weather. I'm God. So he kind of was quite deluded about how important he was. Yeah. So self-centered action, which alienated people, etc., and didn't lead to him getting what he wanted. Then it moves into this sense of actions don't have a meaning, and this sense of being cut off. So actions, not feeling connected to actions at all, meaninglessness being what's going on in his experience, which is, the sense of despair. And like, if things don't mean anything, you might as well just get what you want. You might as well just just have fun, just get completely wasted, whatever. And then a change in attitude, the third phase of him finding meaning and devoting his life to that sense of meaning. And when he's kind of refined that to total perfection, the next day he wakes up and it's no longer Groundhog Day, and he's freed himself from this loop. So the devotion to the life of meaning, and then the perfection of that life of meaning is the opening to freedom for him. And he and this woman have a relationship, and I think he stays in the town that he hated so much and becomes a local. Yeah. So Hollywood happy ending. So if we are to use it as an allegory of as a spiritual allegory, it's that perfect action, the perfection of his actions is achieved, and this is what frees him from repetitive stuckness, from the loop that he's stuck in. So what is perfect action? In the Buddha's Noble Eightfold Path, the book, there are three things that are described that constitute perfect action. So the first one is that perfect action is skillful. Yeah. So who wants to describe what do we mean by skillful when we're talking about it in Buddhism? Does anyone want to just say? just clarify the basics. I know you know. Yeah, Pete.
Actions that don't cause suffering.
Yeah, and well, that's one way of saying it. Can you say a bit more about that? I mean, can we always be sure that our actions don't cause suffering?
Actions that come from a place of positive mental state.
Yeah. So yeah, that's it. The actions that come from, non-selfishness, from positive regard for other people and ourselves. They're not selfish. So skillful actions are aware and loving. And if they're not, then you could think of skillful actions as ones that have awareness and loving and love as their intention behind them. Sometimes we might not feel loving, but we can extend our actions to take into account other people, to benefit other people. Yeah. So the way we normally talk about skillful actions is by going through the 5 precepts, which I'm not going to do just now, but there's a code of behaviour that we can sort of look to that we can rely on, that helps us to ensure that our actions are skillful, that we can examine our lives through the precepts. Having said that, I'm not going to go through them. I will actually. So, I'm not going to go through them in detail. That's probably another talk. But I'll go through the positive precepts. So, loving kindness, open-handed generosity, stillness, simplicity, contentment, truthful communication, and mindfulness. Yeah. So the precepts cover areas of our life, our actions, our speech, and actually our minds. So we can look at our own actions, the way we act, and we can look at the precepts and see, like, would the precepts help me? In for example, last week we were looking at speech and the importance of communication that connects us, and you can think, okay, what would help me connect more? Maybe actually I'm not that truthful about what's going on in my life. Maybe you can experiment. Like, what if I act more in line with the precepts? Does that make my life more straightforward, for example? Yeah, and the precepts are kind of fed by these intentions of loving kindness and awareness, becoming more and more aware of what's going on in our minds, what's going on around us. So yeah, when we're thinking about perfect action, we're looking for it to be skillful. We're looking for it to be other regarding, and not this kind of what's in it for me attitude. We're also we're looking for our actions to be whole. So when we define the word perfect, or sometimes we're talking about right action. So the Noble Eightfold Path is sometimes called like right view, right emotion, etc. But perfect's got this quality of wholeness, integrity, like completeness. So we're looking for actions that are eventually, and this is like at its kind of highest, like when we're thinking about the Buddha, we're looking for actions that are completely wholehearted. Yeah, so you do something kind and generous, and there's no residue or no aspect of yourself that's not behind that action. There's no part of you that's preoccupied with something else. And I think that's really interesting for us to think about. I think it's very, very hard for us to be whole in anything that we do, skillful or not, in the way that we live at the moment. I don't think modern life conduces to wholeness. while I was writing this talk, I had quite a few tabs open on my computer, and I found it very hard to just stay on track and look at the Wikipedia page on Groundhog Day. That's like. We might. I think. What do I want to say about wholeness? That our attention is so divided that it's very, even when we've got the chance to, like when we sit down and meditate or go on retreat, it's very, very hard for us to gather our attention and allow this kind of sense of wholeness. We've just got lots of we're sort of made up of lots of different parts of us, and in the path of practice, those parts of us need to be noticed, known, taken into account, and brought along the path, brought along into our skillful action, so that we become more and more available, so that we can act with wholeness. I think there's a sort of something that seems a bit like wholeness that isn't, that we can get confused by, which is like obsessive behaviour. So I teach drawing, and we were talking about this in the last drawing class I was doing, and we were talking about like how you can get really absorbed, and that's really great, but sometimes you just get obsessed with one part of a drawing, and it feels completely absorbing, but you're not taking into account the rest of the drawing, and I think that can happen in other areas of life. Obsessions, when you get like, I don't know, down some wormhole online, or I don't know, we can get quite obsessed with lots of different things, and I think that part of it is compellingness, is it stops us from thinking about other things, that we can just like somehow that activity, whatever it is that we become obsessed with, stops us from taking into account the wider picture, which is probably a relief in a certain way, but it's not that healthy. It's definitely not what skillful action is, and it's definitely not what whole action is. Whole action is something much more sort of mature and riper that we can sort of hope for if we keep practicing perfect action. Maybe I'll just ask you if you got any responses to particularly that question of wholeness, or divided mind. I mean, does it resonate with you? Yeah. I don't quite know what my question is to you. I want something. Does it resonate, the sense of sort of doing one thing and then thinking about something else, and then you do that thing that you've been thinking about, and then you think about another thing? Pete.
So I can see how having divided attention would mean that I'm not whole in my experience, but does that mean, is that what perfect action means, that I'm just really in my action 100%, like just with it?
It means, I think what it means is that not only are we totally present, but that we're aware enough more generally over a longer period of time, that we've looked at ourselves and our different motivations, and integrated enough in a way for that experience of wholeness to be actually whole, rather than just a sort of temporary glimmer of something. Does that make sense? That we probably can't. I mean, maybe we've had moments of quite wholeheartedness where maybe we're in a situation that really uses us very, very well, demands something of us, and we're very present. Maybe there have been experiences of that. I suppose what I'm thinking of, there's two things. There's that fragmented, divided attention, and then there's just what it's like to have not really done much work on oneself and not be aware of like the different pulls in our unconscious life, the areas of our life that are sort of operating through us without us actually knowing. So I think this sense of whole action needs to include both of that as like a strong current present moment experience and a sense of momentum of having worked on ourselves. Does that make sense? Yeah.
It definitely resonates. I found myself today reading a book, and I think after reading half a page, I realized that I have no idea what I just read.
Yeah.
Because I was just thinking about something completely different, and then in the meantime, I was like, oh, I should check my phone. But then I grabbed my phone, and then out of nowhere, I was looking at Instagram. But I'm like, but I'm reading a book. Why am I looking at my phone? Like, that makes absolutely no sense whatsoever. But then I was checking emails. But then, so it's very easy to get distracted by millions of different stimuli without quite even realizing that that's what's happening. So I had to like actively keep pulling myself back. So I actually read the book and I understand what am I reading.
Mm.
And it's not that the book wasn't interesting, it was, but there's millions of other things that just kept on distracting me, and I allowed that distraction to happen.
Yeah. Well, that's the perfect example of like a lot of our experience in this day and age. So it's something to
Just wondering on that, because it seems sort of like a reflection of modern times, but of course Buddhism has been around thousands of years, right?
Yeah.
And is that describing an ambition rather than, or maybe a pursuit rather than, so perfect action suggests that it should always be perfect, but we never are perfect.
Yeah. Well, I think maybe it's worth saying a bit more about perfect. Actually, I think when I look at the next part, the third component of skill of perfect action, I think that will help fill that out, what that means. Because I mean, we're sort of holding up the Buddha as an ideal of perfection, like someone who's got rid of all the taints of greed and hatred and delusion, so is able to act completely unholy, in an imperfect world. But I think the next part will also help fill that out a bit. Your question. And maybe just to finally talk about wholeness. Like, I think it's just worth reflecting on as well. Like, if you're attracted to your mind being a bit less fragmented, or a bit being able to be more wholehearted, you could just sort of bring that in and ask yourself, like, what am I doing now to promote that in my experience? It, like all of the little modern day temptations, and I think it's a point that what we're trying to teach here isn't just an antidote to modern life. It's something deeper than that, and modern life is particularly throwing this particular fragmentary behaviour at us. So it's something to think about, like, how can I promote this sense of integration and wholeness in my mind if you find that attractive. So the third component of perfect action is this important thing about motivation or intention, and this is a really key part about Buddhist ethics, is that the behaviour is one thing, but actually what's the most important thing is what's behind the behaviour, and is it your intention to behave well or not, and the consequences of that might be varied. You can really consider someone, you can really take them into account, and really love them, and you can try to do the right thing for them, and they might not like it, but you can check your own motivations and, ask if that didn't go right, was that because you were unskillful, i.e. motivated by greed or hatred, or was it because you just didn't know how to help that person, which is a different thing. So we can't act perfectly. We don't have the same advantage as Bill Murray in Groundhog Day, in that he knew exactly what was coming up and he had a chance to practice every day how to perfect his action in relation to all these events that were going to come up. We don't know what's going to come towards us, and we don't know how people are going to respond, but we can work on purifying our intention and acting from that outward-looking, caring, mindful vantage point. Yeah. So that's why we can say that the Buddha exemplifies perfect action, because his mind is untainted, because his mind is only able to respond with loving kindness. It's not even that he has to think, here's a person. They look a bit tricky, to be honest, but I'm going to be loving towards them. It's just like a sense of deep connection with whoever, and able to respond appropriately. And he didn't always get it right either, but it wasn't out of some kind of unconscious problem that he had. Yeah. So perfect action doesn't mean omniscience in a certain way, or or anything like that, sort of godlike overview. Yeah, and just finally, it's said that we need both these things. We need loving kindness and we need awareness. So loving kindness, well-meaningness, it is great, but it doesn't always mean that we act wisely. So we need to have a certain amount of intelligence about how we respond in the world, and we can explore possibilities and think about the consequences of our actions as well. So that's why we need mindfulness, which is, we can think of those as mindfulness standing in for wisdom, and metta standing in for compassion, the two sides of Buddhist realization of enlightenment. Yeah. So got a bit more to say. One of the things that's really important about how we act is that we're tuning into our own conscience. So Buddhism says that our conscience is an innate faculty, and it gets squashed by other things, other pulls and pushes, other values in society that we pick up. But that our conscience is a natural faculty, and that we need to, or we can, if we want to, start tuning into it, trusting it more and more. And part of that is not thinking about the precepts or ethical behaviour as a commandment or some kind of external authority, which is always the problem, and probably all of us will go through that if we take the practice seriously of practicing ethics. We'll probably always have that tendency. So we're not looking at this as a commandment of, like, you must do this in order to be a good Buddhist. In order to be a good Buddhist, don't steal, etc. Because we so easily kind of deal out these things to authority figures. And it's just really interesting as well, if you are meditating for any periods of time, just to notice, like, who are those voices that you bring with you, that you kind of give authority to in your experience, and are they actually helpful? So on my ordination retreat, I noticed that I just had sort of imbued, like, certain authority figures. They're mostly benign ones in my life, actually, but I'd given them like quite a lot of sort of leverage and how I thought about my experience. And I was like some old art tutors, and I was like, just get out of my head. But they wouldn't go away. So in the end, this is a bit of an aside, I had to just be like, okay, you can have your say, and I might not do what I imagine you saying. I mean, and that, that's quite a mild experience of certain figures in my life representing certain things. But we really must take it seriously that it's our own conscience and our own sensitivity that we act on, rather than what we think other people will think are as good or not. I mean, one of the big things at the moment is being on the right side of history. Like we want to act well because we want to be seen as being on the right side of history, and it's all very well, but history is like, whose history, and when does history start? Where's that particular slice of history that we want to be seen on the right side of? What other people think of us might really have very little bearing on what our motivation is. So we're much better to not think in that way at all, but just think, am I thinking of myself, or am I thinking of what the best thing for others are, or oneself in a non-selfish way, in a kind and caring way, if that makes sense. Yeah, and if we've had any kind of theistic upbringing, that that will be even stronger. The sense of good and bad, sin, sinful, guilt, all of that area needs working on. Guilt is not a creative mental state. It keeps us small. It keeps us feeling wretched, and it's not transformative. Yeah, and it also has this. Guilt's always in relation to some kind of authority, or some other person, or God, or something. I think all of that is also partly good because we want to be guided by something bigger as well. Maybe there's a sense that ourselves as we are isn't a big enough guide, and that's certainly why I started becoming a Buddhist. I was like, life is so complicated. I have no way of decoding life and how to live it. I need a framework. I didn't articulate it like that, but that's definitely what I wanted, and I'm so glad that I found it. I needed something more reliable, bigger than myself to kind of lead me through life. So that's the sort of positive reason why we probably project on external kind of figures. But if we can get in touch with that in its purest form, like, it's something bigger, values, connectedness, a mind that can just keep growing, that hasn't got a limit on what it is, then that's a much better guide. It's a much better guide than my art tutors, or whatever those figures are. We've just got such a strong tendency to diminish that sense of needing something bigger into something sort of religious, in the wrong kind of way, dogmatic. That's what we need to avoid. Yeah. So perfect action is. I'll just read a bit actually. From the book. It's not just action which accords with some external standard or criterion, but action which expresses perfect vision and perfect emotion. So those are things that we've looked at. They were the first two steps in the Noble Eightfold Path. Perfect vision being a taste of something beyond our normal experience that kind of reveals a different, better, bigger way of being. And perfect emotion is when our emotions are more in line with that vision. So I'll read that again. This is not just action which accords with some external standard or criterion, but action which expresses perfect vision and perfect emotion. Perfect action represents the descent to the level of action of perfect vision and perfect emotion. In other words, having already attained perfect vision and developed perfect emotion, when one comes to act, one spontaneously expresses that vision and that emotional experience in terms of one's actions. And this is what's happened in Groundhog Day. There was a change of heart, and that drove the plot along. And in a way, that can change the direction of our own plot in the own story of our lives. It can be the thing that makes us start changing the way we behave, changing our habits, getting out of habitual ways of being, and being much more creative. Yeah. Just seeing what else I'm going to say and what I'm not going to say. Okay. Yes, so to emphasise this point about the motivation being important, of course there are loads of actions that can be seen as good. And I was thinking about when I was younger, it's not that I've stopped caring about the environment, but my dad used to call me an eco-fascist because I'd be like, these apples came from Cape Town and, just anyway. I'm a bit more, I don't complain about where he's got the apples from now. And I was definitely wanting to be good. There was mixed motivations in that. There was a definite caring response to the environment and the state that I saw the world to be in, and wanting to contribute to that being better. But there was definitely a sense that I wanted to shore myself up as a virtuous person, that I could be seen on the right side of history. I could be seen, I'm going to be one of the good ones. I've worked out what's wrong in the world, I'm going to be one of the good ones. And it didn't always necessarily mean that I was very kind to people about what apples they bought, or I wasn't very sympathetic to the ways the choices other people lacked, to be honest. And all of that sort of thing. So good action became actually tight and a little bit bigoted. And in the Buddha's Noble Eightfold Path, Bhante he gives an example of how the same behaviour could have different motivations behind it. So suppose he says that 3 people abstain from theft. Okay, so the first person would like to steal, perhaps very much. I don't know if anyone's ever thought that. I would very much like to steal, but he abstains out of fear of the police. The second person has a slight inclination towards dishonesty, but when filling out her income tax return, may be seriously tempted to cheat, but because she is trying to lead the spiritual life, resists the temptation. The inclination is there, but is restrained. And however, the third person has completely eradicated craving. In this case, there is no tendency, no inclination towards dishonesty. So the first person who abstains from theft through fear of the police is moral only in the legalistic sense. The second person, who feels an inclination to steal and overcomes it, is moral in the sense that she is practicing right action in the narrower disciplinary sense. So this is probably the stage that we're all at, is that we have to bring to mind the precepts or this idea of right action in order to train ourselves to become more natural at it. And then only the third, who abstains because it's natural for them to do so, is really practicing perfect action. So there's a sense that perfect action is the goal, but it's also something that we can work towards in our own by purifying our intentions, and getting to know ourselves. I'm going to talk about another film, a more contemporary film. I went to see Women Talking a few weeks ago, and I think it's really interesting. So who's seen Women Talking? Has anyone seen it? Only not many of you. It's really good. It's a very good film. It's set in a religious community. So that makes it interesting because the dogmas of that community are really, really explicit. And what's happened, it's based on true thing. What's happened is that there was, it's a Mennonite community, so it's a little bit like the Amish or something like that. And they're very, very close-knit, farming religious community, very separate, completely separate from the outside world. No vehicles, no technology, etc. And this horrific thing had been happening, that the men had been abusing the women from young girls to full-grown women, and so that had happened, and they were wondering that the men were at court, 'cause some of them had been caught, and the women had a couple of days to work out what to do. Do they stay in the community and fight the men? They had these three choices. Do they leave, or do they stay and do nothing? And the whole film really was them trying to work out in relation to their beliefs, and then having to get to a deeper sense of belief about how to act. So they needed to act. They needed to act collectively. How to act with these three choices. And in a way, the choices didn't matter. What needed to happen was that they needed to work out what values they were going to act, and then that would naturally come. Yeah, so that can be quite interesting. Like if you're caught between a problem and a difficulty, like what you need to get in touch with is a deeper sense of value, and then maybe it becomes more obvious. So in this film, the belief was that if they left the colony, they would go to hell forever, and that meant their children, etc. So that's, they believed it. That's scary. They also believed in Christian forgiveness, and then they had to work out, well, what does that mean? Because they've been forgiving the men over and over again, and this abusive situation keeps happening. And there's also a strong sense of family duty. So they might not happen in such extreme ways in our own lives, but we will have different values, and some of them will be more important than others. And also then there's fear. So that was another pull. So they've got the dogma that if you just don't leave the colony and you go to hell. If you do, you've got forgiveness as a value, family, tradition, duty, and fear, complete fear of the unknown. And you never see outside of the farm, so you can sort of sense in the film this unknownness. And they talk, they are divided, they get angry, they change their minds this way and that way. And one of the women in these discussions seems to just have a little bit more access to loving kindness. She's got quite a big heart, and she seems to sort of catalyse this process among the women where they just start to connect more and become more and more loving. And this idea, they learn actually what forgiveness is on a deeper level. It doesn't mean just letting people do exactly what they want. That's a concern, isn't it, when we're trying to practice virtuously, that we become something that people take advantage of. They realise that. They realise that if God is forgiving, then maybe they can leave the colony. They have to really start to think. So in this film, there's this process of looking at all these values and seeing what's happening, what's the value that's of most most important, and that when they get to a deeper place, then there's a natural response, a natural decision that they can all get behind, but they all need to be in touch with the value. So it's very, anyway, it's not an easy watch, but it's very beautiful and illustrates very well like why we need to purify or what the kind of drives are in our action, in the realm of action. And again, like Groundhog Day, it's like where the intentions change and deepen, then that changes the direction of their lives, and the plot changes in a way. Yeah. Okay, so I've said a few things about that. So maybe I'll just give a chance for you to have any clarifications about what I've said. Or any reflections about your own responses to that. And online, if you are watching online and you have any questions or comments.
My question is, when you talk about forgiveness, and when we look at it under the angle of like, yes, you may forgive, but not in a way that it's allowing, what stands to the tweet? Like, what's the result of that thinking?
Oh, in the film?
Yeah.
I was just trying to be careful not to spoil the end.
But like if it's aligned with like kind of like the teachings.
Yeah. I mean, well, what I was thinking actually was that it's also not skillful to put yourself in a situation where someone can be violent towards you, or is likely to be. Yeah. So they're responsible for their actions, but you're responsible as well, and for being part of. If you can not do that, then that's more skillful, and also just to not. So one needs to look after one's self as well. Yeah.
Is that common like in not that, let's say not in that story is happening in day-to-day life, for example, your job, and your job is something you're helping as well, but you don't feel okay to have that job, even though it's a good job, it's ethical, you're helping animal or human.
Yeah.
But you just feel it like you're not happy. There's something.
Yeah.
Maybe it's not for me or something. So what's that? Because it still is serving and it's something you love, but you don't feel good about it. Like, this is for me, for example.
Yeah.
And then it's just very confusing, and then I don't know how to change it or how to think.
Yeah, like what else? If you love those things, and what else?
What else is possible? Because when you put your thoughts, when you focus, you do your job. When you focus, you're not distracting. But then the other things comes and makes you distracted, and then it gets very confusing. I don't know if you know what I mean.
I mean, it sounds quite. I'll try and answer it in a sort of general way, but it sounds like something that, if anyone in that situation would need to explore quite personally as well. Yeah. But I mean, what struck me was that the sense of like you saying, it's good and it's ethical. Yeah. It's helpful. But maybe there's something maybe it's that like trying to be good without a sort of deeper connection to that work. Do you know what I mean? Like it's quite easy to say, that's good work. That does good in the world, but if we're trying to be something we're not, it's gonna run out. That sense, and not everybody has a choice about how or what work we do, but if there is a choice, then it's worth exploring. Yeah, I mean, I think that's all I could say. Yeah.
Thank you.
And good luck. Yeah.
I find that the fragmentation of the mind is a very real kind of experience, and the lack of completeness of an action is very very apparent when you look at it. So even if you even take today's example, I really wanted to come tonight and I feel great, but part of me is very, very tired. So kind of, it's like, should I be home, or maybe we could go to bed earlier? But I think the way I think about it is almost, so being complete, if it wasn't a complete action, I would have slept more last night. If I was okay.
Oh yeah.
The full integrity of that action of coming tonight and practicing wholeheartedly, and not kind of dozing off in the meditation, would require kind of not letting yourself off the hook, and being more committed. And that goes for everything, even trying to, this kind of information overload sometimes when things are distracting you. I also find that sometimes is non-willingness to face a direct experience, because maybe it's very anxious, and then you kind of, okay, I read this, I do this phone call, instead of, if I don't do anything, it's just uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And I think the first point is really good, and when we think about mindfulness, that the catchphrase is being in the moment, but actually mindfulness, and I think this can help with a sense of wholeness of action. Mindfulness is integrating your past. So, and that can be really positive, like the things that you've learned, the wisdom that you've gained from your life, and looking at the things that are sort of snagging you. And it's also aware of the future, and aware that the actions that we take now affect our future. And that, so that wholeness, that's a really nice point. It has a kind of
continuity.
Continuity, a sense of it happening through time. Yeah, Peter.
I just wanted to ask about that sort of fascist thing that you had going on, and then how it could be a bit bigoted because it's coming from a sense of how others view me. But I also wondered, because like Buddhism can sometimes, is there like a sort of a danger of becoming sort of complacent as a Buddhist as well, and not taking action in the world, or like, I don't know, things like activism, for instance.
Yeah.
So there's a bit of a kind of tension between those two. Like, we want to act, but we also don't want to act unskillfully, so the tendency could be just to not act.
Yeah. Well, that's really good. I mean, that's why we have the negative and positive precepts. So we can say, these are the things we don't do. Like, we don't steal, we don't speak untruthfully. But not only that, we're not just trying to kind of inhibit ourselves, but we're trying to make these things, the positives, happen more and more actively in the world. And, even on the level that, or maybe even especially that Amala Yodin was talking about in the first half of, bringing a sense of loving kindness into the room that you come with, rather than, even on that sort of subtle level where we can be active. And I think, in a way, when we get more in touch with those things, we can find that there's more energy available to do that, to act well in the world, to engage with people. And I don't really know what to say about activism. I've got Buddhist activist friends, and they seem to, find it a very direct expression of their loving kindness practice. And it also means being with people who are quite angry, at protests. And, if you go to any protest, there are so many people with different agendas. Like certain groups will just hop on any protest, and, it can be quite bitter, but there will be positivity there. I don't know what I'm saying now. Something. Yeah.
No, it's just sort of expanding on Pete's point about when to know from your action when to like the strive between striving and letting go.
Mm.
I find that like with right action, you sort of okay, perfect action, but then you're sort of striving, and then you get caught up in that, and then sometimes there's no when to strive and when to let go.
Yeah.
And sometimes I get mixed up in that, of follow my mind, and then it becomes a little bit muddled.
Yeah. Yeah.
What's your sort of?
Well, I think part of that is just watching the effect of different things, and it's quite hard. It's quite hard to know. So watch the effect when you are striving, and does it have a good effect, or watch the effect of letting go. And the more you keep trying both of those, and as you practice, you'll understand what they're doing for you more subtly, I think. Also, there's a stage of the Noble Eightfold Path called perfect effort. I think that will be the one for you to to come to. Yeah, because I think that is an art, like how to make effort, how to strive, where it's going to be effective, and where the effort is basically relaxing. And it takes a while, and it's rediscovering it. I think I'm always trying to work that in my meditations. Still, yeah.
Is it the point when you realise that your striving is actually non-acceptance? Like it's very obviously it's quite subtle, but when it's actually become resistance to something as opposed to striving positively and kind towards it.
Yeah, it might well be that. Yeah, trying to override something else.
Trying to control something until you're like, and then let go, and you're like, I should just let go and stuff.
But it can be a very subtle, fine margin to cross.
Yeah.
It's more like a controlling. I find that's what I find. That sometimes when I'm striving on a daily basis, it's almost like trying to control, like not feel that negative emotion. So I'm sort of trying to put my attention out there to prevent feeling it, or to solve that issue. But maybe.
Yeah. I mean, if you think that you're trying to control things like that, it always feels tight, and it's worth trying to soften a bit or something. Yeah. Okay, I'm going to finish in a minute. I'm just going to talk very briefly about a Buddhist figure that represents really this perfection of action. He's an archetypal figure. So we've got the historical Buddha, and then I'm going to evoke the Buddha Amoghasiddhi, who didn't live in history, but he's a kind of refraction of this quality of perfect action that was embodied by the Buddha and other practitioners, enlightened practitioners. And I think it's just important to, as maybe this is what Pete's point was, that action is important. It's not, as Buddhists, we're not just kind of secluded. We're not looking for this kind of quietism. Action is important, and we can have positive consequences in the world. And when that's perfected, it's become something like he's a green Buddha. He's got his hand like in this gesture, the gesture of fearlessness, and his name Amoghasiddhi means something like all-accomplishing action. This idea that there's a spontaneous, appropriate, energetic response to any given situation in the world. That's possible. And it's something that we can become more and more attuned to by practicing the precepts, by meditating, by understanding what's going on when we act, and infusing that more and more with loving kindness. So there's an archetypal figure, Amoghasiddhi. He embodies perfect action completely. Okay, that's it. Thank you for coming tonight. And next week there'll be more from the Buddha's Noble Eightfold Path, and we'll be looking at perfect livelihood. So this is going to be great for, work is such a huge part of our waking lives, and maybe it's haunting your dreams as well, I don't know. So yeah, do come and we'll find out about perfect livelihood. Okay.
Thank you.